Hi, welcome to the Forecasting for Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brie. I'm a doctor of psychology, financial educator, astrologer, and founder of Forecasting for Success, a community of people improving their financial literacy to achieve financial independence. I blend my expertise as a former professor and financial intelligence analyst with the tool of astrology to help break down why you are struggling with specific money habits and the best way to form more intentional responses and choices when it comes to money, especially to help you feel more secure in your financial decisions and improve your money skills for building long-term wealth. Welcome back to the Forecasting for Success podcast, the show where astrology, personal finance, and spiritual self-discovery meet the real world. Today, I'm joined by the brilliant and multi-talented Rosa Hope, PhD, who is an award-winning researcher, lecturer, and PhD astrophysicist, who's also a certified transpersonal hypnotist, former performing artist, and global nomad. Her life's guiding question is, how do we human better? And she's built a career exploring that question from both the scientific and the spiritual sides. In this conversation, she shares her journey from studying the cosmos to helping people navigate their own inner worlds. This episode is equal parts inspiring and practical, full of insights you can bring into your own path of self-discovery and growth. I'm really excited for you to hear her wisdom, so let's dive right in. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. I have with us a very special guest. I have Rosa Hope, PhD. So hello, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brie. I'm so happy to join you today.
That's awesome. I'm very excited for you to be here, and I'm so looking forward to our conversation.
hmm
If you wouldn't mind, could you please just take a few minutes and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So I'm a practicing astrophysicist, but I'm also a practicing spiritual guide and transpersonal hypnotist. So in a very interesting way, my life and my professional life as well has managed to blend science with spirit in a very unique and very grounded way. So I'm excited to talk about that and how we can essentially blend what we know about the physical cosmos with what we know about universal laws and how we should live. But ultimately, what I like to tell folks is that my practice is centered on answering one really important question, which is how do we human better? How do we do this better?
Absolutely. And I was so excited to see that. And I would love to understand what sparked that guiding question for you, because it's such a key question for all of us on this journey.
hmm Totally. Well, I have to say that my journey began long ago, probably in childhood. I was that kid like sitting in a grove of trees, probably hugging one, you know. So I've always had a sense of the spiritual aspect of life. Also, I had a lot of difficulty growing up figuring out what the rules were. What are the rules of
Mm,
engagement between humans? What are the social rules? What are the economic rules? There's a lot that we do in our lives that really is just coming from tradition or from things, just the way things have always been done.
mhm.
And I was always highly skeptical of that. That's probably why I ended up becoming a scientist. I had a lot of questions that people didn't have very good answers to. So when it comes to this question of how do we human better, I think when I was studying astrophysics, everything I was studying and all the research I was doing was really broad in scope. I mean, it's universal in scope, possibly infinite in scope, right? And zooming out so much actually showed me how precious what we have here actually is. I mean, even if you just study planets, planets around our star, planets around other stars, you start to discover how rare an environment that is supportive of water-based and carbon-based biology actually is. And in a sense, I started to feel that, at least for me, I'm really glad that researchers are out there and that, you know, this is an active area of study. But for me personally, I began to see very clearly that I didn't think what was out there was nearly as important as what we're doing here now. And that's not just from a spiritual perspective. If you think about things like climate and, well, I mean, everything, there's a lot happening these days, right? And it's pretty hard on everybody to try to hold it and try to find moments where we can refocus on our own well-being, on the well-being of our communities. But it's pretty clear that there's a lot that needs addressing here on Earth now, right? So what I was really looking for wasn't out in the universe and it wasn't out in the stars. It was right here at home. And we can't build anything new here. We cannot create a different way of life here if we haven't experienced what it should feel like within ourselves. So that's what it really comes down to. If we want a human better, we have work to do internally first. So there are people that will argue with me. I was reading a post where someone was sharing a quote from Bell Hooks. And she was talking about the fact that especially in the spiritual industry, shall we say, there's a lot of focus on the self-development, self-ascension, etc. And it made her concerned because she was like, well, where's all the talk about the practice of love in the community? And she has a really good point. But I think my counterpoint is, if you haven't done your work, if you haven't focused in on your stuff, then there's a very real chance that if you try to go out in the community and try to be supportive and try to do the right thing, all your unaddressed issues and all your unmet needs can bleed out in ways that you don't expect and can actually cause harm in the community. So I am an advocate of focusing in first to do some housekeeping, clean up your own house first, get clear. And then what you're bringing into the community is someone who can be a better channel of love or a channel for peace or a channel for justice or equanimity. If we don't bring a bunch of baggage into it, we can do a better job of actually supporting others rather than just projecting our baggage onto them. So I'm sort of like, both are really important. And the community aspect is actually the goal. We are here to serve one another and to share our gifts with one another. But I do think most people, everyone I've ever met anyway, it needs to start with themselves first and do a little housekeeping before they kind of jump into that community-focused work. So I think that's healthy. I don't think that should be controversial.
Yeah, I would hope not. I completely agree with you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I was so curious how you balance this dichotomy, these two spectrums of being so curious about this, greater outer world, the cosmos, and then also how you're exploring the inner world, like you're saying, because both places have very important work, very important aspects to them. And it's so amazing that you mentioned this very important inner work that we all do, because it's how we, in my opinion, appropriately go through this feedback loop of bettering yourself, of wanting to be more self-aware and doing the inner work that you're speaking to, and then going out in the community to try to be a very productive member, loving member of the community, but then also learning from others where we have more work to do, because there's always something that we're just not aware of. If you haven't been exposed to a certain idea or exposed to a certain aspect of what it's like in unique communities that are out in the world, it helps you understand, oh, I've learned something new. I could be more open-minded. I could have broader applicability to these various communities, et cetera. And so there's always different ways that we can learn more about ourselves and learn more about the outer communities as well. So this is very important work, and I'm so excited to hear more about it. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Yeah. So there were a couple things you brought up here. So let me make sure I remember what they are. So the first one was like bridging the kind of hard science inquiry side of things with this internal journey. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is about how we work with the external world to continue our growth. So both of those are really juicy.
Go for it. I love it.
Yeah, right. Okay. So as far as, even today, I'm still working with grad students on academic papers. So it's a really specific process, especially in the hard sciences and academia, when it comes to trying to find not just an interesting question, but an interesting question that we have the tools to try to answer now. Yes. And that's actually the heart of how research makes progress. is being able to identify that. It's a skill. And not everyone really has that skill. The ability not just to find, it's not just finding the best question, it's finding the right question, which is to say the most interesting one we have the tools to answer now, or the tools to approach now. What I love is that in my own inner work, I use this same skill, which people call it low-hanging fruit, right? But what they're talking about is what is going on, or what is the issue that is arising, or the sticking point that I have that I actually have the bandwidth or the tools to work on right now. And I use this all the time. When I was first kind of awakening back in my 20s, I was just like a hot mess. So it just felt like a big burning pile of garbage and I didn't know where to start, right? So it's like, just start where you're at and start working through it. After a couple of years, I was much more clear. Once I got through that initial, what I like to call housekeeping, for me, it was a little more messy than that. But once we get through that initial process, it is more like this iterative way of self-inquiry that I'm describing, where I'm checking in with myself, saying, using the same curiosity that I suppose led me into academia, but it's looking at yourself, exercising your self-awareness, and asking the question, what is the thing that's sticking? What is the thing that's triggering me? What is the behavior I engaged in today that I don't feel good about? So it's like, when you've acted out of integrity, or when you got mad a little too fast, or when you said something maybe a little pointy that was needless, like we didn't need to twist the knife in that situation, but we did. Why? And really kind of checking in with yourself. But the truth of the matter is, you cannot do inner work if you don't have any bandwidth. So there's a whole journey there too in my own life of figuring out what kind of lifestyle would give me the bandwidth to do the work that I felt was the most important, not just on myself, but out in the world too. So it's this like magic combination of those things. What do we have the bandwidth or the tools to address right now? Another piece of it is, I think I have had some skeptics kind of come for me in the past because they're like, you're a hard scientist. You studied physics, and astrophysics, very evidence-based, science. We like things we can measure in that field. If you cannot measure it, that's right. If you can't measure it, if you can't detect it with a detector, then it's no longer science. It's conjecture, and a lot of theoretical physics right now really is in the world of conjecture because we have no way to develop an experiment to test these ideas right now. So in science, we like to stay away from that with things that if we point a telescope at it, or at least in principle, if we had a powerful enough telescope, we could point it at this phenomenon and learn something about it. We really like that. And where that falls apart when it comes to spiritual development or even a spiritual worldview or personal cosmology is that most spiritual phenomenon, maybe some paranormal investigators can fight me over this, but most spiritual or paranormal phenomenon are not really something you can detect in the traditional hard science sense. So I argue, though, that it doesn't mean that there's no room for researching these phenomenon. It's just that it lives in the realm of social sciences, not hard sciences like physics and chemistry, et cetera. It lives in the world of social science like psychology, et cetera, where we're working with things like case studies, to try to understand what the emergent overall pattern is that underlies this phenomenon, rather than trying to worry about if we can detect the energy levels or something. And there are folks that are still working on that are working on, for example, it kind of at the interface with medical technology, looking at the way brain waves of psychics or channelers or people meditating, actually trying to take quantitative data on what's happening when people are engaging with spiritual or paranormal phenomenon. I'm not a part of that world because I didn't train as one of those people. But it's like, if you really want the sciencey stuff, there are people out there trying to do it with tools of that kind. But when it comes to physicists and astrophysicists, I mean, there are a lot of them in the closet that have fully drunk the Kool-Aid and have a very rich spiritual life and set of beliefs, but it's not something they would openly discuss. So in my own experience, I believe the hard evidence. and I know a lot about how the physical universe functions, but that's the reason I studied physics, because it can tell us a lot about how all of this works. But what I realized, by the time I was in grad school, is that the physicists will never be able to tell us why. Physics cannot do any meaning making for us. So even if we learned everything about how the physical universe came into being and how it functions, we are humans and we want to know why. Why? What are we? What is our role here? What's the meaning of life? What is my purpose? We want answers that really boil down to the meaning. And at the end of the day, the type of person I am, I did want answers as to the how, but I also wanted these other answers as to the why. And really the only way to do that is to study philosophers, religion, spirituality, all of those things. So in a sense, I've become a kind of polymath where I've spent, I've probably been reading about the paranormal and spiritual life since I was 14 or 15 years old. And I was studying physics not even that long, but it's like I have this kind of shared expertise. I have a lot of personal experience along with anecdotal experience from my clients, from my family, about the reality of these experiences, in the sense that it's not something that one person comes into contact with. In fact, there's a whole spiritual industry because lots of people have these experiences. Lots of people get these downloads. Lots of people feel these intuitive connections or have precognition. So in a sense, it's like I'm just waiting for the numbers to catch up with our worldview. And I think that it will, especially now that we have the internet and social media, et cetera. None of these things are hidden the way they once were. It's not esoteric knowledge really anymore because it's just out on the internet and you can Google it. Now, the other thing you asked about, it was something about how we can learn from other people. Oh, yes. So when it comes to personal growth, that's only part of this. And of course, the only person we can control in our lives is ourselves. We make decisions for ourselves. We decide how to proceed. We decide what to do with our lives, etc. We can't do that for another person. We can't wake another person up. We can't decide who they love. Like everyone's kind of up to themselves. That's why there's so much focus on the self, because this is where we can do a lot of work. But that being said, we want to bring the best of what we have. We want to bring our gifts and our understanding into the world. We want to light up this space and we want to make it safe for other people to show up. We want to make it safe for people to grow. And so because of that, we do have to go out there. And what you said is very true. Like we can find ourselves in an echo chamber when we work too much on our own or with the communities that we've been a part of for a long time and lose touch with the fact that there is such a broad range of experience and perspective out there, not just for us to take part in, but to teach us more about ourselves. So in a sense, when we learn more about others, about their experiences, about their perspectives, we do learn about ourselves. We learn about the collective. We learn about where our hangups are, where maybe we hadn't seen them. It shows us the dark corners in ourselves and also gives us a chance to sit with the discomfort of growth. When you are faced with ideas that you're uncomfortable with or that you've never heard before, it doesn't always feel quite right in that moment, but it's giving you an opportunity to see what you can sit with and also to see if you can see the humanity in someone who feels very differently from you or has a very different background from you. So in a sense, opening ourselves up to the greater world and to the wider community is a beautiful mirror and way to do our own work. But I would argue that these exchanges are not just about acting as a mirror. It's also about being a bridge builder. It's not just helping you, it's helping the collective when we do this stuff and work on this stuff together. So in that way, that's why I think the exchange of ideas is so important and open debate is important, because that's how we shift and adapt our own worldview to be sort of closer to consensus in a way. We have to be able to communicate with one another and have respect for the fact that we're all on a different journey and have different experiences and perspectives and try to sit with that.
That's so well put. And I'm like humming over here because I'm so excited by what you're saying. It's not very conducive for a podcast for me to be constantly interrupting, but I just kept wanting to go, yes, yes, exactly.
Oh, no worries. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that you brought that up because I just want to say everything all at once. Let me see if I can calm myself down over here. Yeah, it's so important what you brought up because a lot of people end up being quite hard on themselves whenever they've identified a new area of growth, personal growth, of what you're saying. And it's very helpful to try to remind people that if you've identified an aspect of yourself where you could be better or you could do better, whatever the appropriate situation is, that identifies growth. That's not something that you should be hard on yourself about. That means that you've identified, hey, I've now learned new information. I've learned a new way of doing something. And next time I just know I'll do it this new way that I've identified works better for myself and hopefully my community. So that
hmm
should be rather an exciting item that someone has identified rather than feeling shame or negative emotions surrounding it. Is that, I have to raise my hand as well. I was quite a hot mess as an early adult. So I continue to try to do and live better every day. And that's the point. That's the point of being here is to evolve and grow over time. So hopefully we're a little gentler on ourselves about that process. And like you said, understand that mostly what we can control is ourselves, but it's also important to identify where within your community you can insert yourself to help others. Because again, it
hmm
repeats that cycle of personal growth and community growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you brought up something that I have been thinking about lately, which is this shame spiral. Because
Mm,
in a sense, if I agree with you completely, when you've identified an area where you aren't showing up the way you want to, whatever that means, the fact that you've identified it means you're already on the road towards seeing what's going on there. All of my personal practice, as well as the work that I do with my clients, is very much about a heart centered life. I'm a huge advocate for heart wide open. And I understand that if you just show up in heart wide open all over the place without kind of setting yourself up for success first, you're probably going to get burned, right? So there's a kind of process that we go through to get ready for living with heart wide open. And most people know that they have some practice in place already for heart opening. For most people, that's meditation or
mm,
something along those lines. So we practice it, but we practice it in a closed container like the yoga studio or the foot of our bed. We do it in a place that is safe and just get to experience what it feels like when we open the heart. And a lot of that, it could be your consciousness too, but it's generally the same process. But having the heart open also involves these other pieces. So, compassion work is a big one that I teach, and it's generally easier on one side or the other for people. So, either it's way easier for you to hold compassion for others, or it's way easier for you to hold compassion for yourself, but you're judging everybody else. So, the people, you know what I'm saying? So, the people who can hold space and hold compassion for others tend to be pretty hard on themselves because it's like your ire has to go somewhere, I guess, but it tends to be like one or the other. So for me, it was much easier for me to hold compassion and to practice forgiveness for others. And it took me a long time to offer the same to myself, which is to say, the things that I had done wrong or the things about myself that I thought were bad took a lot of deep work for me to stop holding the shame and the judgment that I had really internalized about myself and turned into narratives about who I was. Like, I'm a bad person because I did this thing in high school. Who cares? But these things can have sticking power and they do shape the narratives around who we believe ourselves to be.
mhm,
Now, when we're doing a compassion practice, it's like you can identify where you have it harder, right? So if it's
mhm.
easier for you to hold compassion for yourself and be gentle on yourself, but you find yourself watching this mom with the screaming baby in line at Target and you're judging her, then you know where your work lies.
Yeah.
But what it really comes down to is like, how can we expand that to encompass everybody? And that means you too. So if you're easy on yourself, be easier on them. If you're easier on them, give yourself some grace too, you know, because ultimately, if we can't, particularly when we internalize it, there's a lot of issues around shame and the shame spiral. Because what will happen is you'll feel shame, then you'll feel shame that you're feeling shame. And then you'll feel shame that you're more ashamed for feeling shame. And it kind of, you know, and then it kind of spirals out. And we're trying to find the exit ramp from that kind of behavior. The goal is not to judge ourselves or anyone. In fact, I'd say the goal is non-judgment across the board, though I know that's a big ask in the world that we are in, but that's where we're aiming. I'm not pretending we're all going to get there, you know, or any of us for that matter. But the point is that's the goal. That's where we're headed, is to practice non-judgment, is to spend time trying to understand where other people are coming from, or where you have shared humanity. Where is the overlap in the Venn diagram between me and this person I feel I can't possibly understand, and nothing that they do vibes with my values and my beliefs? What is shared between us is where that bridge lies. And that ultimately is the thing I think we should be focusing on more as we're trying to find the path to reunifying, to being able to be gracious with our neighbors and form stronger communities. Is that if there's so much focus on what divides us, that it's drowning out the opportunity to focus on how much we actually share. The human condition is very broadly the same for like pretty much everybody. And I think we're kind of losing sight of the fact that most of what we all want is actually very, very similar for ourselves and for our families. But that's all I'll say about that. So compassion practice leading to heart-opening practice. There are two other things I wanted to add about that, especially because, again, no matter how much work you're doing, you will probably run into people that have not been feeling their feelings for a decade or two and have not been working on their heart-opening practice. So two of the things I have been talking about lately, this is advice I've been giving my clients for years. A lot of people are scared to take their heart-opening practice, you know, that they've been doing in meditation or yoga class, and then turning that into a lifestyle, like walking around heart open. But ultimately, the things that we do to avoid that are not good for us. So isolating, putting walls up, ultimately, in order for the light to get in, your heart's going to need to be open. So we set ourselves up with other types of supportive skills, frankly, so that we don't have to do that, so that we don't have to shut down. And the two that I focus on the most, the first is really setting boundaries. Boundary setting is something you can do explicitly, but it's also something you can do energetically. And the reason it's important is because it sets the standard for how everything interfaces with you, whether that's other people, animals, the unseen world. Getting really good at setting and enforcing a boundary will go a long way towards keeping jerks out of your space. Really. And it might surprise you to the degree that it works even without having to talk about it to anyone. But the other piece is resilience. So for those of you that have ever been in a romantic partnership, you know there have been times when, for example, your partner hurts your feelings without meaning to. And the reason it happens is because you're wide open to them, right? Like you have made yourself vulnerable and open-hearted. You're with a loved one, you know, they care about you. And then something they say or do really hits right where it hurts because you were open. But instead of using that as a reason to shut the heart down, oh no, I got hurt, let's put the walls back up. What it's actually trying to teach you is resilience. Our heart is like the noble starfish. We can recover, we can regenerate, we can recharge after we are wounded. And understanding that about yourself can make it much easier to show up in this way. Because especially when someone does it by mistake, the intention matters a lot. And if someone's not trying to harm you, if you have no resilience, you'll still be pretty messed up by that. But if you have resilience, you have the bandwidth to understand where they were coming from and what was intended and to bounce back. So those two things are really crucial to being able to live this way, because sometimes people are going to cause harm on purpose or not. Sometimes the world causes harm. Sometimes you have an accident. Sometimes you get sick. But you don't want your reaction to this to always be to shut it all back down and shut down the whole apparatus, because you can't shine, you can't show up, you can't bring light for the people around you if you're shut down. That openness is a big part of that process. And again, it's like a lifelong practice to get better and better at it over time.
Very much. That's a very important point that you're making because it can take away from personal fulfillment if you're constantly trying to just be on the defensive and keep yourself protected at all costs. It's definitely missing out on different levels and types of personal fulfillment. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that and how critical that is for how we walk through life and the different aspects that we can hopefully enjoy from it. Because you're right, we're never quite sure what life's going to throw at us. But the resiliency, like you mentioned, is so critical for our human experience here.
Well, it's really important because it's what lets us keep showing up.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, its kind of counterpart is courage, right?
Hmm.
Because it's one supports the other. Having the courage helps boost your resilience, and having resilience helps boost the courage. So it's like those two things really go together. If you know you can recover from a setback or from having your feelings hurt or from something happening that you don't expect, if you know that you can recover from that, then it's easier to show up and try new things and stretch your boundaries a little bit and go for
Hmm.
things that might be a little beyond your grasp, but that are really calling to you. And because without that, it's like you said, it's always in the defense or always in protection mode. And staying safe in that way, I'm not sure serves our long-term well-being.
Exactly. Yeah. And just due to the different ways that we grew up, some of us might have been taught some skills of what it means to be resilient. Others might not have received as much support as they should have received. And also, the ways that we evolve over time, sometimes we need different types of resiliency, and that's not always intuitive. So it's incredible that you're doing work in this space, on top of the fact that, as you mentioned, humans are a meaning making species. Like we have to understand our purpose and reasons behind things. And like you said, that doesn't always come from a textbook. We just don't have the tools sometimes. The tools haven't been invented yet to measure certain things, but that doesn't make them any less purposeful. There's still a purpose and an intent and an importance to the meaning that we pull from our lives and our different lived experiences. So I'm so excited that this is how you're helping people and blending these two worlds.
Yeah, well, this is a conversation I love having, particularly with skeptics, right? Because I think from the spiritual side, many of us, in a sense, feel like we have received our purpose. Like I know what my purpose is because I learned it from my higher self or it was channeled to me, et cetera, et cetera. And from the skeptic side, they're like, they don't think anything external exists or something like that. And one of the things I love about mindfulness practice, let's say, or heart opening practice, is that it actually doesn't require you to have any belief system whatsoever. You can believe it's a bunch of baloney, and if you do it, you're still going to benefit from it. that's,
Yes.
that's one of the beautiful things about it is that even just your physical body and your nervous system will benefit from this practice. And if that's all that's important to you, you're still the proof is in the pudding, as we say in the South.
Yes.
You're going to get the benefit anyway. And when it comes to meaning making, so one of my best friends like falls into this category. He's like, yeah, Rosa, you and your woo. But what's interesting is that we don't need to depend, even the woo among us don't need to depend on an external source for what our purpose is or what the meaning is. What I love about the focus on meaning making itself is that we are empowered to decide for ourselves. You don't actually need it to come from anywhere else. If you feel in your heart like you want something, or if you feel in your heart that it's important, you are empowered to decide what your purpose is. You are empowered to decide the meaning of your life, the meaning of meeting your wife when you met her, or whatever it is. You don't actually need it to come from the higher self at all. You can make it up for yourself and still work with that with these tools
Exactly.
and still get results. Yeah. So that's kind of one of the beautiful things about doing this work is that you can view it from many different levels, from base physical, like I'm only worried about my nervous system and my neurology and what's going on that level and how I can use brain plasticity to improve my experience. Or you can move it all the way up to to non-local consciousness. I am an expression of the divine that is, that what you see in my body is just this tiny piece of this larger collect. Like you can go all the way, is my point. And at every level, the tools still do the job. So
Yes.
that's kind of my argument to the skeptics out there, is that I have no need to change anyone's mind. I'm actually just suggesting that you give it a try and then see, you know, take the data, write down for example, what your goals are or what your hangups are, and then work with the tools and then check back in with yourself and see what has changed. So in reality, it's like I'm only asking people to give it a go, to initiate a practice. And then, as it's very similar to what happened to me, once a practice is initiated, you start to see how your life changes, how your environment changes, how your job changes or your relationships change. There's a lot of shifts that happen as we get more clear and let go of our baggage, put our burdens down. And when we do that, the call to me was to integrate all of this. In fact, integration is sort of the big thing that I do now from a spiritual perspective with my clients. Is what we're doing is we're taking the spiritual knowledge or experience or the spiritual practice, for example, and we try to answer the question, how do we translate this into how we live all the time? How do we transmute the knowledge into wisdom? How do we turn the practice into a lifestyle? And the answer is different for everybody because we all have different belief systems. We all have different practices that are effective for us. And so it's this very bespoke process of digging in, figuring out what works, where the hangups still are, and then finding the courage and the tools to bring it into how we're living all the time. But again, doesn't require any belief system whatsoever. I have worked with people from like tech startup founders who don't believe in any of this stuff, to PhD scientists who totally believe it but would never talk about it, to like starseed community members that think their soul comes from another planet. I have worked with the full range of these people. And again, it's like the tools, they just work. So.
Exactly. Because they're really human tools. Like that's the point, is they're meant for us and our lived experiences. So regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, they are applicable, especially like you said, whenever it comes to mindfulness. Because really, at the end of the day, all that's asking for people to do is just to be present with whatever they're feeling and explore what they're feeling. Again, without that shame, without that judgment or any of the negative connotations, because that's one of the only ways where we're able to really break down something that's complicated, something that's giving us pause or something that we're hoping to improve. Because it's the negativity, the negative connotations that usually stop people in their tracks. So it's incredible that you're able to work with so many diverse people, diverse clients in order to help them and meet them where they're at, regardless of their lived experience or where their belief systems lie.
Well, it takes all types, doesn't it? I really do think that what we are doing together here actually has space for all these different, I would say, like iterations of consciousness that we each kind of represent and embody. The diversity of experience is and of belief and of perspective is actually this beautiful thing. It's like this multifaceted jewel, and every different person I get to work with, I get to secondhand experience how the light refracts through the facet that they represent. There's a beauty in that diversity. I mean, it's fascinating. I think sometimes we get into our own heads and start to think that everyone experiences the world like us. In an interesting way, I have never really felt that way. I've always sort of known that my perspective didn't reflect how other people were experiencing reality. But because of that, instead of I did feel isolated for many years. Once I got over that,
Mm.
it seemed like a really ripe invitation to say, well, if these are things you can't perceive or experience yourself, why don't you ask?
Yeah, exactly. And I agree. I like the diversity because I feel like without it, again, what would the point be? Like the point is to evolve and to learn from others. And for that, we need a lot of different diversity. And
Mhm.
that's a really good segue into something that I'm really curious about with how you help your clients. You mentioned that you're able to blend safety, integrity, and joy whenever you're helping people. And I would love to hear more about what's unique, specific to these three modalities or these three qualities with how you help your clients. I find that so fascinating.
Yeah. So, in a sense, I would say that's almost a value statement of mine. So, what I'm really communicating is my personal values, not just about how I live my life, but how I show up in my work with my clients. So, in a sense, there are a lot of people in the spiritual industry that work in a lot of different ways. But what I found is more important than the modality you're working with is really the person. You want the person to be a match with what your needs are. So, when it comes to my own spiritual work and the way I work with my clients, of course, safety is imperative. You cannot do a deep dive, especially because I use the tools of hypnosis. Safety is incredibly important. Also, having a space of non-judgment is incredibly important because under hypnosis, the client can tell, like if you are judging something they're saying, or if you feel uncomfortable with something they're saying, they can feel it under hypnosis because we are cracked open a little bit. So that safety is actually something I've really cultivated. And I would say it's actually a property of the space that I hold while working with people. And that's intentional because we want to be able to do deep work very effectively when we're spending time together. You set this time aside, you book the session, like we want to get the work done while we're there. When it comes to integrity, I would say that is probably equal to safety in the ability to actually serve others, not to throw shade on anybody, but in the spiritual industry, it's not always clear to me when people are acting with integrity and stuff, especially now in the age of AI. You know, a lot of people sell based on lifestyle factors, like look at my luxurious life in Bali, but we don't actually know anymore if we can trust an image or not. Is it actually you standing on a driveway, but you switch the background out? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's no way for us to really know unless we do know. So, for example, like I don't use a fake background in my Zoom. This is what my office looks like. That sort of thing is important to me. It's transparency, it's integrity, it's being rather than seeming is very important to me. And also, that builds trust. Trust, again, is imperative for doing deep work. That's just a fact. Joy is actually something that this has actually caused a little more trouble than the others have because some people, especially earlier in your spiritual journey, spirituality on its own feels serious as a heart attack. Like it has to be this sort of airy, heady, high vibe, like equanimity, is one way of putting it, which is like we always have to keep it very, like very serious and very straight or something.
hmm
And I don't believe that at all. I think when things were hard and when digging through my stuff was hard, it did feel pretty serious, but I didn't have anyone to kind of help me figure it out or to guide the way at that time, except books. I had books by Ram Dass. I had books by Dolores Cannon. I was reading like Gurdjieff, trying
Ooh,
to, well, I have issues with him, but whatever. Like, it's like I was reading all of this stuff to try to understand what I was going through, and I didn't have a person in my life to help me or guide me with this.
yeah. So it was a
So for me,
process. Yeah.
right, exactly. But for
Yeah.
me, it was almost like a serious study. And then I got to where I was working with clients that kind of happened naturally in a way. Like I started working with friends and family. I was just the friend you ask if you're experiencing something weird or of a spiritual nature, or have you ever thought of whatever? Like I was the person you would talk to. But then I started getting references of friends and so forth until finally I was like, I should just do this. Like I should just actually show up and do this.
It's a sign.
Yeah, right, right. If it's happening anyway, I'll just say yes to this.
Right.
But the joy, it's like I tricked myself into discovering that this work could be fun. It's not just that it could be fun, it's like I had to give myself permission to
Mm.
laugh. I had to give myself permission to enjoy the journey. but it was transformative for me once I did, because once our spiritual work is not serious as a heart attack, it doesn't mean it doesn't get heavy. It doesn't mean we don't process really dense or complex emotions. That is still true, but we can hold it lightly. We don't have to like grip the difficulty of it. We can have a hard time and it's the right thing to do, and we're still happy to be here. All of that can be true together. And in fact, I think that's one of my personal qualities that makes me unique as a practitioner. That's why people like to come to my workshops over and over, even if it's the same workshop. I get repeats all the time just because they like how I show up in that space, the way I'm able to hold it lightly so that we can explore things that are hard or that we're struggling with or having a challenge from without getting bogged down by it. We can understand that it's part of the process and we can still enjoy our time together.
That's beautiful. That is very well said. I think I want people to go back and actually listen to that again because that was so succinct. That was beautiful. That something might be heavy, but you can learn to hold it lightly. That's lovely.
Yeah,
I
thank
think that's
you.
important. I hope people just sit with that for a minute because that's really, really critical work because I feel like that's where a lot of people genuinely need help. Like you said, people feel like it's terribly hard work, that it's too difficult or too challenging, but it really is possible.
Hmm. Well, and I want to leave like just one little kind of jewel to sit with that can help with this particular transformation, which is just that hard does not equal bad.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Hard does not equal bad. 100%.
So that's just, it's something to sit with and something to unpack a little bit.
Absolutely. I can already feel my subconscious like doing some work back there because I'm in the same boat as everyone else. I've still got a lot of work to do myself.
Well, we all do. That's why we're here together, you know? So, yeah.
Absolutely. If you have time, I'm actually really curious. I love to hear about people traveling because that's one of my values is travel. And so I
Mhm.
would love to hear more about how just being a nomad and your traveling has helped you learn how to human better, how that's so important to the work that you do.
That's amazing. So no one's ever actually asked about that before.
Really?
Yeah. Well, so this was interesting because I know that one of your more recent guests ended up leaving the UK to move to Thailand. And there are a lot of people in this industry that do end up moving overseas to Guatemala, Costa Rica, etc. There is sort of this movement of global nomads taking their online practice and then going to live in some beautiful location, you know, out in the world. And I actually have the opposite story, which is that
No way.
I went on my walkabout and went and lived all over the world before I started doing this work. I
Ah.
was in my early 20s and my pants were on fire and I needed to go somewhere and see some new things and meet some new people. And so I just did it. And I would say this was the beginning of me beginning to realize people use the term master manifester to the point where it's almost like a dirty word or something. But it's when I realized it's not just me, y'all, it's all of us. We all have the power to do what we want. That doesn't always mean there isn't an exchange to be made in order to do it, but that was the biggest lesson of my 20s is that I could do almost anything I wanted to, but there was a trade-off somewhere that I had to accept. And one of those things was me just up and leaving the country. You know, I figured out some visa program. I moved to Europe. I went around Europe for a while, had some boyfriends, you know how it is. Like, and then I moved to Korea with my best friend, where we taught English for a while and just like enjoyed that expat life. Went to Japan, you know, it's like, so I spent years of my 20s just out. I mean, okay, there was a point, I'm getting loose now, can you tell? There was a there was a point where my mom was sending me emails asking, like, are you dead? Because she
Oh.
just hadn't heard from me in so long. I was not dead. I was very busy. I had intense nightlife at that time, but I really needed that. I learned so much. So, what it came down to for me was that I felt like that I had felt really trapped. during high school and college, I felt the world I was in was too small for me. I was living in the South, I was in North Carolina, Bible Belt, and I've never been that person. I just felt like a foreigner in my hometown, and I had this instinct or this hope that I could find the place in the world where I belonged, that there was some place out there where I would fit. I would just land and it would be like, this is what I've been looking for all this time. So I had this longing in my heart that was calling to me. And guess what? I went all over the world and I never found it. There are a lot of incredible places out there, but with all the beauty and benefit of different cultures and different locations, there's always a shadow side too. Every place has its own unique balance. There's no Shangri-La out there, that we know of, and not even for me. But what I did realize was that my sense of home was something that was inside of me. So I felt just as at home, like in a hostel in East London, as I did in my actual parents' house. How could that be? Why would that be? And the other thing was that even with all this travel, learning different languages, embedding myself in different cultures, that longing in my heart for the place where I belonged never left. And so after looking outside for it and going all over the globe, I had to ask myself, maybe it's not out there. Maybe it's in here. And that was a pretty fraught journey because in here, like I said, was like a flaming pile of garbage. It's like it was just so much baggage, so much like my priorities were all screwed up because a lot of my priorities had come from culture or, they were externally sourced. My priorities and my values were externally sourced. They were not internally sourced. So of course it's confusing. And of course I've taken on a bunch of baggage. But once I started that journey inward in my late 20s, it was before my Saturn return, but not by much, maybe by 2-ish years that I started to wake up and go, wait a minute. Well, oh man. Okay. So I had these weird paranormal experiences. That was kind of the initiation where this started to turn back inward. And I was like, okay, recall, there's more here than meets the eye. And then it started to turn around and go in. And I didn't completely understand that process at first. I was exploring, like with plant medicines and things like that, and saying, I know there's something here. I know there's something here because it was touching my heart. And I didn't know why. And then are you tarot familiar at all?
Yes.
Okay. So you know how people have their tower moment where like
Yes.
your whole life just burns to the ground? I had one of those. Now I'm like, everybody has that. But yeah, I had
It's
my
usually
tower
about
moment.
the Saturn return time.
Yes, it certainly was right on schedule. But yes, so I had my tower moment and really was decimated by that, like all the way to scratch. Oh, it's okay now, but that's just it. In that moment, I remember asking my mom, gosh, I'm talking about her a lot. I love her so much, bless her. I remember asking my mom, how do people go on after something like this happens? And she didn't have she was like, they just keep going, you just keep going.
I see.
Which wasn't particularly helpful at that time in a sense, but at least it gave me a direction. And then I began to realize that if you have found yourself in a set of circumstances where you have a blank slate now, and again, at this time, I was like, a blank slate means I have nothing, but that's not true. I realized I have all of the lessons I learned from before, which means you're not truly starting from scratch. You are starting from a blank slate as far as what you want to build, what kind of life you want to build, what kind of career you want to build. But because you have all this wisdom from your hard knocks from before, you can be so much more intentional about what you create and create it around the things you actually value, the things that are actually important for you, the things that actually light you up can become the center of what you build next. And I have to tell you, it's not that it was easy at all. I cried so much all the time. It was very intense and very hard to figure out. but I could almost feel the process that was happening. I could feel that something new was coming out of this. I could hear the call of my heart, and I had the courage to say yes because I had nothing to lose. And it led me to such a different experience than what I had before. My life is full of love in a way that I never could have even imagined when I was like 23 and like, being dragged down the street, drunk by my friend or whatever. It's like I had no idea that this was even possible for me. And the fact that I've landed here now is no accident. I approached it with intention. I showed up. I learned that for me, integrity is my center. That is my true direction. And I know very clearly if I'm out of integrity or if I'm in integrity. I can feel it in my body because I'm at the point where it almost makes me feel a little sick. If I do something that's out of integrity, I know right away and I can correct it now. I can apologize. I can take it back and reword what I said. It has been my center and my arrow forward, but it's led me to something really beautiful where I can appreciate my moment when I'm in it. And so, in some way, for me, I know that I've landed and I know this is where I have always dreamed of operating from. And the only reason I've made it here, though, was because I made the commitment. And most people don't have the courage or the desperation to make the commitment until they have something like a tower moment, because it clears everything out and says, now you have nothing left to lose.
Exactly. It's a forcing mechanism to get you aligned to the path where you're supposed to be, where you're meant to be for that
Right.
deeper purpose.
Right.
That is beautiful. I don't know if you are a motivational speaker, but if you're not, you need to add that. Can we sign me up for the first one? I would like to go.
Oh my gosh.
That was beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I finally got relaxed and there it is. It just
That was an incredible story. I'm so grateful that I asked that. And honestly, it was a little selfish just because I'm so passionate about travel. I was just curious to hear about your experience as well. And I'm also curious about the paranormal experience. I don't know if that's too personal. If it is, then we can
no.
cut this out.
No. It's I am an open book. So yeah, well, it's look, it used to be hard to talk about this stuff because I'm an astrophysicist and I'm an academic. And what's funny is that over the last 2 weeks, several of my colleagues have started following me on Instagram. So like cat's out of the bag. And also I'm happy for them because they don't have to follow me, but they are. So it means
Exactly.
there's some part of them that's curious or interested. And I'm much happier living with my full self expressed rather than having to
Yes.
silo myself. So absolutely. But honestly, I personally haven't had a huge number of paranormal or ghostly experiences throughout my life. Interestingly, my in-laws and like my husband happens to them all the time. So it's been kind of funny that I'm this very grounded meat and potatoes. Well, in comparison, anyway, I'm this very grounded meat and potatoes person, very practical, actually. This hasn't been a super practical conversation, but like I manage our finances and I do all the administrative tasks. And, so it's like my roots run deep. That being said, this was in my 20s again, and I was a wild animal. My parents went on a trip to Russia. And while they were gone, my best friend and I decided to throw a keg party at their house because they had a nice big house with room for lots of people, private property. It was, we went for it. And the party was wild. Everyone had a good time. Friendships were initiated that night that still exist today, So to some degree, like good things did happen. The place was a hot mess after everybody went home. So the next morning, she and I were cleaning up the house. There's like a big broken vase we were like hot gluing back together. You get the picture. And this was kind of like near the kitchen area. We're like mopping the floor, beer. And above the door, this is about 11 feet off the ground, there's an antique clock hung. It was just decoration. We did not have a key for this clock. It was one of those wind-up clocks. And it had been hanging there for years. We didn't even have a key for it. It had never been wound as long as I had seen it anyway. And as we were cleaning up in this room, all of a sudden it just started ticking. So it's just tick, 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 like perfectly timed, just like it was a watch. And we just sat there listening because at first we couldn't figure out what it was. And then
Sure.
finally we figured out that it was the clock. And we're looking at each other like, how can this be? Trying to like rationalize it, right? Like, did someone wind it up? Did someone get a ladder out? We're trying to figure out what happened, and ultimately had to realize we don't even have a key for this clock. Even if someone did get on a ladder, how this is impossible. And my friend, who came from a conservative Christian background, that's probably why she liked me so much, because it was this other end of things. But she just finally left the room because her background didn't really allow room for things like this to take place unless they were like really frightening. And so she just left the room. And I'm sitting there listening to this thing ticking for a while until I thought to myself, it's upsetting her. This is really weird. And I just told the clock, stop that. And it stopped ticking. And interestingly, even inside that moment, I had like goosebumps because, of course, we get the heebie-jeebies when the unexplainable occurs. But I wasn't cowed by it. I just went back to cleaning up. Like didn't really change my day. It was just a strange occurrence. But then a couple days later, I was upstairs. I was staying for a short time, like in a room in my mom's house, because of course, me and my friend were about to go abroad. We were in our traveling days. And my mom, when she was in college, was kind of like a Joan Baez acoustic guitar singer type. And so she had this old pitch pipe, like from the 1970s. It's like the 6 notes of the guitar
Oh,
strings, and it's
yeah.
like a harmonica, basically. But I had this because, we were in her house, and I had been using it so it was out, but it was underneath a chair, underneath a pile of clothes. But I was getting ready for bed one night, and suddenly I just heard a note. And it just kept going and wasn't stopping. And I couldn't figure out what it was at the time either. I thought it might be the AC or something. I was like, is that, what is this sound? So I'm searching the room. The vents are on the ceiling. So I'm going back there being like, is this air? Is it coming through the door from the hallway? And finally, I'm kind of triangulating the sound with my ears, and I'm zeroing in on it and realize it's coming from under the chair. So I go over to the chair and I'm listening. It's getting louder. And then I start pulling the clothes away. And there on the carpet, underneath all these clothes, is this pitch pipe just intonating a note continuously this whole time. And I picked it up and put it back in the guitar case. So I have nothing for it. There's no air vent nearby. It's on the floor under a pile of clothes. Air vents on the ceiling on the other side of the room. I got nothing. I just put it away. I was like, okay, we're going to bed now. But needless to say, these experiences, it's like people are always looking for a sign, right? They're like, give me a sign, give me a sign. I was not looking for a sign. I was getting ready to move overseas and leave all this behind. I was going to meet some new people, like be in a new place. But it was just a bunch of weirdness. I went overseas, had all those experiences, came back home. But what they were telling me was that there's a mystery here. There's a mystery here in our experience, in our perception of the physical world. There is some strangeness. And ultimately, I think that's what left that door ajar for me for looking inward. Because if there is a deeper mystery, then we start to go out and seek it. And in fact, I have had clients that I've worked with that have had a number of very strange paranormal experiences. And when we go under hypnosis to try to understand why, the answer almost always is because it helped you wake up.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. And
Yeah.
it's so important to ask questions. So I feel like whether or not you have experiences with this part of the spectrum, the point is to ask questions just to understand more deeply what's going on. For the record, you're very brave. I respect the bravery of just picking that up and being like, you can go back in the box. Also, I'm sad I missed out on this party because apparently it was so incredible that the ghost showed up. Apparently someone was like,
Yeah.
Theodora, get your coat. We got to go to this girl's house.
Look, my old best friend and I definitely put on some incredible shindigs back in the day. I am still very proud of like the friendships that were formed like through this high energy medium of like throwing all these wild young people together. But yes, I think there is a larger pattern, not just in my life, but in paranormal phenomenon overall, that high energy situations or high energy locations do tend to attract stuff like this. So, for example, young girls going through not menopause. Wow, that's me. Young girls going through puberty, sorry, do tend to attract it because it's very high emotional energy. And this
Yeah.
party was absolutely that. So it's like we shouldn't be surprised if some slightly strange phenomenon do chase something like that. I had a circumstance in my house now where I had a cleaner come to the house that I had never hired before. And wow, she was a bulldozer. I have never seen she was like moving all the furniture to like vacuum underneath the like a queen size bed. I'm like, wow, lady,
That's
but
powerful.
she was intense, but she was so intense that we could still feel it in the house
Oh,
after she was done and had left. And we started to experience ghost like activity or poltergeist like activity here after that cleaning. So we ended up like cleaning, well, maybe that's not the word. We cleared the space with the help of Palo Santo after the fact to kind of get things back to normal. But even just one person who is charged up like a battery or a lightning rod can attract some of that into a space. But it's again, it's like it's not something I question anymore. I have it on video. So
that's wild.
yeah, so I'm kind of done, kind of fiffer faffing like back and forth on is this real, is it not, was it your perception, whatever, because it's like by the time it's so evidential that you can take like a video of it, you can show people what room for doubt is left. The doubt is what the proper explanation for it is, not whether it happens or not.
Exactly.
So,
Yes, exactly. And really, all you can do is smoke cleansing in those moments.
right.
Yeah, because later on, maybe we'll develop some tools to be more literal about the explanations. But in the moment, that's about all we've got. It's just our
Yeah.
iPhones and some smoke cleansing.
Yeah. It's very effective though. And also I enjoy a little bit of, I guess, what I call spell casting, which is really boundary setting. Not all spell casting, but what I do is fundamentally boundary
Yeah,
setting,
yeah.
which is declaring what the boundaries are around the space you inhabit. That is very powerful too. And we have not had any issues since that time with people coming into the space that are bringing kind of an unwelcome vibe with them. So setting those, again, here we are back at boundary setting. It's a very powerful practice. Just try it, see what happens.
Absolutely.
So,
I really appreciate you sharing all of that. Thank you very much for taking the time because those were very exciting stories. Eerie, but exciting. I love it. Where can people find you? Like what you're welcome to introduce your next offerings or where you're excited to help people next. I would love for people to work with you.
sure, sure. I would love that. So the best place to find me is Instagram. My handle is at It's Rosa Hope. Just I think it'll be in the show notes. But I am an open book. So again, feel free to DM me. I'm pretty active on there. I'm a little bit on Facebook, not very much these days. And I also have a website, rosa-hope.com, where you can find all of my offerings. My main offering for people who are not local to me is my integration immersion. So, what it is a 2 to 3 month program, which again is meant to help you embody your spiritual knowledge or spiritual experience or practice into how you live your life. And it's a very holistic program. We do try to cover really every area of your life. So, that's why it's an immersion. There's a lot to work on there. But I also want to note that this December, I'm going to host an online workshop that will be pay what you can. So definitely just find me, follow me on Instagram, and the details for that will go up soon. And if you're interested in trying out what it's like to work with me, especially from a hypnosis side, you can go to rosa-hope.com/bonus and get a free empowerment journey from me so you can experience what that's like.
That's lovely. That's so exciting. I'm happy to hear that that's what's coming up in the near future.
Yeah, I'd love to see you there too if you're curious. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say I'm going to have to sign up for that too. Absolutely. Thank you again so much for everything that you shared here today. It was so lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brie.
I want to thank you so much for joining me this week on Forecasting for Success and let you know that you can read the transcript for each podcast episode on my website, which is linked below in the show notes. I've also included the link to send me your money questions if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast at forecastingforsuccess.com/podcast. And if you're ready to get started on improving your financial literacy and developing your own personalized money plan, I encourage you to join my Forecasting for Success community, where I teach you everything you need to know about budgeting, how to choose your retirement number, how to invest in the stock market, and so much more. I go live in the community each month to check in on your progress and help answer any questions you may have. And it's a supportive community where you can also check in with other members and learn from their experiences as well. I hope you take good care of yourself, and I'll talk to you next week.